This is a day on which we have the opportunity to celebrate what women have achieved in the past, to reflect a little on our own experience as women, and to think about what women might focus on achieving in the future. And so what I'm going to do today, because I'm largely involved in nursing and midwifery, is I'm going to focus on that area of healthcare. And I'm not actually going to take you on a journey around the world or anything like that. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on a nurse who I consider made an important contribution to women in the past. I'm going to talk a bit about my own journey through healthcare and what I've tried to achieve. And I'm going to use my own experiences to say a little bit about how I think nursing and midwifery leaders should develop their own journey through healthcare if they're going to achieve the best possible outcomes for the women that we serve. So let me get going. First of all, I want to talk about Elsie Stephenson. And this is the woman from the past that I've chosen not to remember on International Women's Day. She lived from January 1916 to 1967, July 1967. And she was, in 1956, the founding director of the Nursing Studies Unit at the University of Edinburgh. This was the first university department of nursing in the United Kingdom. And Elsie saw a need to transform the way that nursing was viewed. And of course, remember, nursing was principally a female profession. She felt it should be seen as a profession of similar status to medicine. And she was not afraid to take action to try and achieve that. And for Elsie, the action that was necessary was to ensure that nursing, like medicine, was taught at degree level. It's a shame, really, that I don't think Elsie Stephenson is all that well known in the world of nursing and midwifery, because actually she was a woman who was well ahead of her time. Remember that the need for nursing and midwifery to be taught at degree level was hotly debated over a long period of time. And nurses and midwives being taught in universities and to the level of degree didn't really become a reality until about 50 years after Elsie first thought of it. So why am I talking about Elsie, apart from the fact that I think she was an inspirational woman? Well, I myself am an alumni of Edinburgh University and the nursing studies course there. And this is my cohort of fellow students. We studied between 1970 and 1975. I was actually born in Edinburgh and brought up nearby in a little village called Gillen. Some of you may know Gillen, not because I was actually brought up there, but because it's got one of the most beautiful beaches in the world, or certainly on the east coast of Scotland. And it's also got some of the most famous golf courses in the world. And if any of you are fellow travellers and are itching to start travelling again, but can't go too far afield, I would strongly recommend a visit to Gillen if you felt like it. Elsie Stephenson herself wasn't Scottish. She was born in County Durham, where her father was a farmer. However, one thing that I have in common with Elsie Stephenson is that our careers were influenced by our fathers. In Elsie's case, it's said that it was the early death of her own father that got her interested in working in caring professions because she had looked after him. My own father studied medicine at Edinburgh University. There he is, looking rather solemn in the black row of Mr. Walter Mercer's clinic. And then he became a general practitioner in Gillen. He was the first member of his own family to go to university and set great store by university education. But he was also a well-respected local doctor. And I attribute my interest in the field of caring to him, as well as to my mother, who was a nurse. So my father went to Edinburgh University. Elsie Stephenson set up the first degree nursing course in the UK at Edinburgh University. And here's how together they influenced me. My father wanted me to apply to study medicine because he didn't realise that nursing could be studied at degree level. I, however, had wanted to be a nurse from a very young age, so I had a bit of a dilemma. So I was absolutely delighted when I realised that Edinburgh University offered a degree nursing course. I applied and was accepted, and thus was able to ensure that both my father and I fulfilled our ambitions. And I studied first to become a nurse at Edinburgh University, and then I went on to become a midwife, hence my eternal gratitude to Elsie Stephenson for setting up the Nursing Studies unit. But a degree wasn't the only thing I got from Elsie Stephenson. Let me continue to explain. Whoops, here's her picture again. And as I've said, she was an inspirational woman. And she was named in the Journal of Advanced Nursing as Britain's nursing messiah of the 20th century. But this wasn't only because she established the first nursing degree course. It was also because she was thinking about teaching nurses in a very different way from the way in which they were traditionally taught. Generally, nursing courses focused very much on anatomy and physiology and the process of caring. But Elsie Stephenson recognised that health was actually a very complex issue, and that the health of populations, how people coped with their health and how they wanted to be cared for, was a function of wider societal issues, of culture, of how they behaved within that culture, and of individual attitudes. So Elsie decided that it was very important that nurses learned other subjects apart from things like anatomy and physiology, and thought about epidemiology, sociology, psychology, even anthropology. She felt studying these subjects was of equal importance to the basic nursing subjects. And this led her in turn to put a strong emphasis on these subjects in the degree course and on certain concepts stemming from them. The first of these concepts that Elsie held very dear was that we should always focus on the fact that even if everybody looks much the same, wears the same outer clothing, they're actually all individuals. And that we ought to give individualized care to people that is based on evidence and on the principle of informed consent. And the second issue that Elsie held very dear was that if we were going to be able to ensure that everyone was treated as an individual, we also needed to learn about high quality leadership. And we needed to think about how we could teach nurses to have courage, to always look at their work in a spirit of inquiry and innovation, so that we could act as advocates for patients, for women, and we could take part as equal members of the multidisciplinary team. So I learned about all these things on the nursing degree course at Edinburgh. And I feel I was very lucky to be part of such an innovative curriculum. And as I continued my journey through nursing, I became passionate about the need to give care and to develop care services in a way which put people, women in maternity services, at the centre of their care. I just couldn't see any merit in a healthcare system which was based on the patriarchal power of the professional. Our power as professionals, I felt, rather lay in our ability to advocate for people, to give them guidance and to give them support. So throughout my career, in my various roles, in my journey, giving person-centered care and helping others to do the same has always been my main aim. And I've held this principle dear, whether I've been giving care directly to women or developing care locally or arguing for change at a local level, or indeed when working on policy at a national level. And I definitely feel that it has been beneficial to have the principle of person-centered, women-centered care at the heart of everything I do. If you're trying to achieve change as a nurse or a midwife or a doctor, it's often very tempting to argue from a professional point of view. And to say we should do it this way because it's the midwifery way or the nursing way. But actually, if you say you should do things because it's the women-centered way, it's much easier to achieve change and indeed to develop high quality care. Now, you might think, because I'm sure lots of you listening to me today read lots about policy in health services, that all of care in health services today is indeed person-centered. But I think too often we pay a lot of lip service to developing care based on individual needs, but in fact, the needs of the organisation take precedence. Sorry, I forgot to flip my slides forward. And so the organisational needs take precedence over women-centred care. And of course, it's taken the COVID pandemic to shine a spotlight on how difficult it can be sometimes to ensure care continues to be patient-centred, particularly when things are really difficult. And certainly when we've been trying to give care throughout the COVID pandemic, what we've found is that we are dealing with even stricter organisational controls than normal, which have to be put in place to protect institutions from being overwhelmed and to protect patients and to protect staff. But it's my contention that even in these very difficult times, it is possible to try and develop care that focuses on the individual and ensures people's personal needs are met. Let me just talk a little bit before I go on about what patient-centered care actually is, or person-centered care, or women-centered care. There's many different terms. The definition from the Institute of Medicine is that providing person-centered care involves providing care that's respectful of and responsive to individual patient preferences, needs and values, and ensuring that patient values guide all clinical decisions. And the Health Foundation, in a document entitled What Everyone Should Know About Patient-Centered Care, said is we must always remember that what's important to one person in their healthcare may be unnecessary or even undesirable to another. And the Health Foundation goes on to say that, interestingly, when care is tailored to individuals, they're much more likely to stick to treatment plans, take their medicines correctly, and interestingly, choose less invasive and costly treatment. I think this last point is really important because there are some out there who say that care based on personalisation and choice is an expensive luxury we can no longer afford. But this is not borne out by the evidence. And as it's International Women's Day, let me just pause to mention the link between person-centred care and the improvement of the status of women. It is very possible to argue that through the position of health services, we can help to empower women to be confident, to strive for their rightful place in society, and to help ensure that societies flourish. But this cannot happen unless, through their access to healthcare, women experience respect as individuals and feel valued and realise they have a right to make choices and decisions. There's plenty that can be said about empowering women and the importance of that. And this slide just highlights 3 comments from the World Bank, from Barack Obama, and from Kofi Annan, 7th United Nations Secretary General, all highlighting the importance of empowering women. And my argument would be that as leaders in healthcare, women can empower other women through the services they deliver. So I'm going to now talk a little bit about some of the things I've tried to do in terms of ensuring person-centred care in maternity services, particularly. Now, some people might be surprised that I've had to work quite hard to ensure person-centred care in maternity services, because it's always been a sort of mantra of midwives that we give women-centred care. And certainly for a very long time, policy documents in maternity have advocated that the woman should be at the centre of care. This is the latest policy document that is the overarching one for England, and it very much says that personalised care should be at the centre of everything we do. However, the fact of the matter is that women are often given the impression in maternity services that the choices they would like to make are not available to them, or indeed they're not even told about the possibility of choices. Women don't even realise, for example, that they could give birth in a place other than a hospital labour ward. Women can be labelled as difficult if they want to make choices that the professionals themselves would not want to make. And they often ask if they're allowed to do things, as opposed to saying, this is what I want to do. So in this context, I've always tried to ensure, first when I was working as a community midwife in southwest London, and later when I was managing maternity services at King's in southeast London, I've always tried to ensure that women could choose how they wanted to give birth and where they wanted to give birth. Excuse me. And in particular, I always wanted to make sure that women could really make an informed choice to plan to give birth at home. When I was at King's, it was typical for maternity services to pay this lip service that I've already mentioned to choice, saying, well, if a woman asks to give birth at home, then of course we'll provide a midwife to help her. But the fact was they didn't actually promote the service or the possibility. They didn't routinely explain to women the potential benefits of this choice, or indeed the potential risks of the choice. And they didn't set up the services in ways that ensured the choice was a possibility. All too often, a woman who chose a home birth would be told when she went into labour, oh, I'm really sorry, there isn't a midwife available. And at the last minute, the poor woman had to come in and have her baby in hospital, which wasn't what she wanted to do. And women would say, oh, I had to fight to get a home birth. What an unfortunate expression to have to use in the context of birth. Or they would say they didn't think it was allowed, so they'd opted for a choice that was less than optimum for them. So when I worked at King's, along with all my wonderful colleagues there, I tried to change this. Now, this is quite a complicated slide, but it doesn't really matter. It's actually very simple, what I would like you to take from it. At the time that I was working at King's, it was very much thought that choosing to have your baby at home was a very middle class white woman's choice, that it was only really that group of women who wanted a home birth. But what I thought was the reality is that actually it's just that group of women who are capable of making this demand for a home birth. So let's not make women demand a home birth. Let's tell them it's possible. Let's offer it to them and see what happens. So what happened was that because we were offering a service of home birth and it was staffed by confident, competent midwives, at King's, we had a home birth rate way above the national average, above 7%. And yet, on the far side of this slide, you have Chelsea and Westminster Hospital, who at that time had a home birth rate of 0.5%. Now, the irony of this slide is that Chelsea and Westminster Hospital is in one of the poshest areas of London. And therefore, if it's true that all the women who were demanding home birth got a home birth, then it was likely that they lived in Chelsea and Westminster and they should have the highest home birth rate. Whereas at the same time, King's was one of the poorest and most deprived and most diverse boroughs in London. So that wasn't the population that were expected to choose home birth. And what this slide illustrates is that when you actually develop a service, positively offer it to women, women in a sense come out and say, I would really like to do that. And they can achieve something that they might never have imagined they were even thinking about. So my message from this little story really is that if we want to personalize care and ensure that women get the kind of care they want, then what we have to do is really develop services and make sure we truly offer a range of choices for women. If we don't just talk about maternity and talk about other aspects of nursing and indeed about our lives, at the other end of birth, there is death. And if you think about dying, it's exactly the same sort of thing as thinking about home births. A lot of people might actually prefer to die at home, but typically the services that we build around death and dying are offered in hospital settings. Might it not be worth thinking about really offering people a wider choice about how they might fulfill not only the beginning of life, but also the end of life? Well, of course, personalising care is not necessarily easy, and that might be why it doesn't always happen. It can take enormous amounts of energy, but I would argue if that energy isn't worth it, then what are we here for? Let me tell you about another example of personalising care. I was working as chief executive at the Royal College of Midwives. And what I knew from surveys was that one of the things that women really care about in maternity services is what happens to their partner. And one of the things that really affects how they feel about their birth experience is whether their partner was able to be with them at the birth. And of course, outside of any really unusual situation, that is normally what happens. But they also really cared about the partner potentially being able to stay after the baby's born, because a baby might be born at 11 o'clock at night and the mother's not going to go home that day. So she has to wave bye-bye to her partner, and he has to wave bye-bye not only to his wife, but also to the baby. They also care about their partner potentially staying with them if they have to be admitted to the antenatal ward, perhaps for induction or something. So I used to think when I was the CEO at the RCM, why can't we change this practice? It seems kind of crazy. But if I talked to midwives and I said, how many people help enable partners to stay overnight, maybe one hand would go up in an audience of 50 people, maybe two at best. And it kind of made no sense to me, but there were plenty of excuses. And what people said was, well, we don't have space for another person to stay. Most maternity units have, 6 or 8 beds in a bay. But the reality was that not all partners wanted to stay anyway. So if you had an 8-bedded bay, you weren't going to have 16 people. And also, every bed had a chair beside it. And it's really easy to buy chairs that turn into little pull-down beds. So actually, I didn't think space was a huge problem. Then midwives would say to me, but all the other women will mind. They won't be happy with having a man on the ward. But all the women were sleeping behind curtains anyway. And the reality was that when we talked to the other women, they were far less conservative about this than the midwives were. Then they came up with behavioural issues. If we let the fathers stay, they'll all be misbehaving, running around in their pants, and they'll be drunk. Well, the experience proved that men behaved extremely well, as did partners who might not necessarily be men. Then the final straw for me one day was when someone said, well, what about health and safety? The men will burn themselves making cups of tea. Well, I don't think it's really common for men to burn themselves making cups of tea, certainly not in my experience. And the truth was that all these excuses came to nothing. And the reality was that when we introduced the idea of the possibility of men staying overnight, and those that wanted to did, the reality was there was only ever positive outcomes. The men were very comfortable, they were very well behaved, the women were very happy, and guess what? The midwives were happy because the little things were dealt with by the partners. So if a woman couldn't get her baby out of the cot because she was sore after a cesarean section, the father did it, leaving the midwife free to concentrate on more difficult things like helping with breastfeeding. And also there were less complaints about postnatal care. Everyone knows that answering complaints is extremely time consuming, and it means you've got an unhappy woman on your hand. So this was an example of personalising care, giving women what they wanted. And yet still, many maternity units don't allow women to have their partners with them. And I want to say, why not? And I would like to challenge current leaders of nursing and midwifery when they're on their journey to improving healthcare, to not to say we can't do something, but to say, I'm sure we can do something. Let's try it. And then let's solve problems that emerge. Another of my roles at the moment is that I'm chair of the British Pregnancy Advisory Service. And that's really interesting because British Pregnancy Advisory Service is a service that enables women to make their own reproductive choices and provides counselling currently in relation to whether or not a woman's going to continue her pregnancy or terminate her pregnancy. However, in the future, BPAS is planning to start not-for-profit IVF services, because what the people who work at BPAS are interested in is not the rights and wrongs of abortion or the rights or wrongs of IVF, but in enabling women to make the choice to manage their pregnancy in the way that's right for them. The focus on BPAS is on the woman. And our advocacy slogan is, we trust women. Trust them to make the choice about the life that they, not BPAS, will have to go on to live. The aim is to provide flexible, responsive caring services, which as far as possible, allow women to make the choices that they want to make. Of course, the law constrains choice to some extent in abortion services, but that is gradually changing. And it's a real pleasure for me to chair an organisation where, regardless of overarching regulations and restrictions, the people working in the service do their very best to provide person-centred care at all times. I'm also currently a non-executive director at the board, on the board of Kingston Hospital, a trust in southwest London. And this trust at Kingston was awarded outstanding in its last care quality survey. And interestingly, here again, we have an organisation where everybody working within it is doing their very best to provide person-centred care. And one of the areas where the CQC picked out Kingston for particular praise was in the care of people living with dementia. And the report that we got following the CQC inspection was that care and treatment was delivered as part of a person-centred culture. And the aim at Kingston has always been to ensure that when people come into hospital suffering from a condition and they have dementia as well, we try and provide care that respects their individual needs and tries to make it and we try to make their care as homely as possible to try and reduce the disabling effects of hospital admission. Because what we know is that an awfully high number of people coming into hospital in the older age groups experience serious functional decline during the course of their hospital admission. So it's really important that we focus on person-centred care. And I'm delighted to be on the board of a hospital that has that as their focus. It's interesting that at Kingston, the leader of the maternity services there has tried her very best to keep personalised maternity services going, even during the pandemic. And we've enabled partners to spend much more time with women than has been commonly the case across the UK. And we've been trying to ensure that we continue to have compassionate visiting during COVID. And we've introduced laptops for all the patients so that they can communicate with their families. And we encourage families to drop off postcards with little messages on that can be then delivered every day to the wards. However, what we've also realised that even these general attempts to ensure continuing person-centred care aren't really good enough. So we've started instituting a system whereby we talk to individual people about what will make a difference to them. And just recently, one patient said what he wanted was to have his favourite paper brought to the ward every day. And another family said that what they wanted to do was drop off a hot home-cooked meal to their relative every day. So this was enabled for these people, and it really wasn't all that difficult to achieve. And I don't really see why you wouldn't want to try and do that. So again, another message of mine to the leaders of today's nursing and midwifery services is that things are possible. You just have to want to do them. So, are things good enough? We're now further than 100 years from the the achievement of women's suffrage, and you wonder why we haven't got further. Maybe it's because people are scared of giving person-centred care. Maybe they think that people will make mad choices, that they'll do things that really are very silly. But they don't, you know. I think what happens is if you show that you're willing to offer people care that's focused on them, then people start to trust their caregivers and actually generally do very sensible things. I actually heard a story recently from a friend who told me of a person she knew who had witnessed her sister's birth. And it had been a really, really difficult birth and not very pleasant. So when this woman was having her own baby, she decided she would choose to have an elective cesarean section. She just didn't want to have to go through labour in case she met the same problems her sister did. So off this woman went to the antenatal clinic expecting to have a terrible fight because she knew that an elective cesarean would not be the optimal way for her to give birth, given that everything was normal and there was no problems with her pregnancy. So as I say, off she went for a fight, determined to have the choice she wanted. However, contrary to her expectations, she wasn't met by resistance. She met professionals who were open-minded and said to her, yes, that's perfectly possible. There's no reason why not. But they discussed her options and her choices, made sure she saw the same people throughout her pregnancy. And in fact, over a period of time, she chose to go into labour normally, and she ended up having a straightforward normal birth. But if her feelings hadn't been respected, that would never have happened. And again, I think this is all down to what we want to achieve on the ground, and what we need is high quality leadership. Another thing that fascinated me once when I was at the Royal College of Midwives was the issue of the birthing environment. And at the time I was there, we were developing lots of what we called midwifery-led units. And these were really just like home birth, but in a not at home. So they were specially designed units for women who were having very normal pregnancies and births, but who didn't, for some reason, want to give birth at home. And I visited masses of these units up and down the country. They were all lovely, but some were lovelier than others. And the thing I got fixated on were plants. I quite like plants, and I think homes with plants in them are lovely. And some of these midwifery-led units had proper plants in them and looked really nice. Some, however, had plastic plants, which I don't really like very much, and some had no plants at all. And I thought, well, why is this? I mean, there's clearly no rule about plants because everybody's doing something differently. And it turned out it was all about midwifery leadership and how strong the voice of the midwife was in advocating for these units to be completely centred on the woman, completely centred on providing a home-like environment for the women. And it was about whether the midwife's voice rang out alongside the voice of infection control or health and safety. And of course, because these were absolutely home-like places, there was no infection reason why you shouldn't have normal plants, and no health and safety reason. So my argument really to today's leaders in nursing and midwifery is that we still need to transform our services to provide personalised care. And if we're going to do that, you have all got to develop transformational leadership, which emphasises focusing on people. It's vibrant, energising, inspiring, and exciting. It creates opportunities and possibilities, and it's different from management. Management's necessary because you need frameworks, you need some kind of system to ensure that everything moves forward in a similar direction, but you also need leadership, which ensures flexibility and ensures that we can give people what they need and what they want, rather than treating everybody exactly the same. And if we're going to do that, we need as women to be courageous. We need to be brave, and we need to speak out. And we need to ensure that we, like Elsie Stephenson, way back when she developed the nursing studies unit at Edinburgh University, take action to achieve what we know is best for women. And I really hope that that encourages everybody on International Women's Day to do the very best they can for all of the women across the world. Thank you.
in the middle of September, from the 13th to the 20th of September, we're running an 8-day tour, which is 5 days in London, a day in Derbyshire and a day in Bristol. And rather unusually, you can come on the whole tour, which I hope lots of you decide to do. But if you want to dip in and just join for one or more days, we're looking at making that possible as well. So the idea is each day will have a theme. So we're starting on Monday, the 15th of September, and we go back in history, really. We start at the beginning as much as we can. And we talk about the involvement of women in being apothecaries. We go to Apothecaries Hall, we learn about the history of them. We go to the Museum of the Knights of St John Hospitaller in Clerkenwell, learn about women's involvement there. And last but not least, on the first day, go to the Chelsea Physic Garden and have a speech there, a lecture there. So each day will be a mix of visits to places, a talk or two, and also I'll be leading in London some guided healthcare and medical walks with links with women. So that's the first day. Second day, we're looking at nurses and their international influence. So we'll be paying a visit to the Royal College of Nursing. We'll also go to the Royal Society of Medicine, where I used to work, because they've got some first editions of Florence Nightingale statistical records, and also have had 3 female presidents, so they'll talk a little bit about that. Day 3 is the military, so women in healthcare and medicine involved in World War I, World War II, and even today, you know, in the army in particular. So we'll be visiting the Endell Street, where the Endell Street hospital used to be. We'll be going and paying a visit to the National Army Museum. The following day is all about women and epidemics. Oh, sorry, I tell a lie. No, the next day we're going up to Derbyshire to learn all about Florence Nightingale and go to her home, Lea Hurst, where she spent her early childhood. So that's a day out on the train, which should be really good. And we're going to a beautiful garden in the afternoon called the Cascades, where it's all about the, I suppose, the holistic impact that beautiful spaces and gardens and water can have on our well-being, whether that be mental or physical. Then we're back to London for Pioneers, Politics and Women Doctors. So this is all about Elizabeth Garrett Anderson, the first medical school in London for women. We'll go and pay a visit to Barts, and in particular to the Maggie's Centre there. So that should be a really good day. And day 6, this is where Cathy's playing her starring role. We're back to London, and the Royal College of Midwives, the Royal College of Obs and Gynae, Cathy speaking, and we've also managed to persuade Terry Coates, a midwife, and also the advisor, the clinical advisor on Call the Midwife. She's going to be talking to us as well. We're then in the Borough and Southwark area, so Bermondsey. So we'll be talking about the plight and the role of women and the difficult lives they led, certainly in the late 19th century and early 20th century. You've then got a day off, so we'll think of some things to do in central London, but more to let you choose your own day. And then last but not least, the very last day, we'll make our way down to Bristol, and we'll learn about the medical school there, about Elizabeth Blackwell, the first doctor to qualify, female doctor to qualify in America, and the link between Isambard King and Brunel and his great ship, the SS Great Britain, and Florence Nightingale. And in the afternoon, we pay a visit to another more holistic approach to healthcare, and again, another beautiful garden. So it's going to be quite a busy week, but I think it's going to be really good fun. And we're going to do quite a lot of walking, not too strenuous, but a lot of London links. And it'll all come together. And I hope that that we get quite a few of you deciding you want to come along.